frozen in place, his eyes locked on the burnt mark behind the cottage, with the sound of the screaming companion still ringing in his ears. Kevin watched as the man with the cane would leave, only to return almost immediately, bringing back hunter after hunter after hunter. The man with the cane would repeat the ritual with each of them, drawing up the circle, with the hunter placing the candles on top of the symbols. Each of them would then take the spot within the center, holding the gun, before being set ablaze in the moonlight. They would all burn, they would all scream, and they would all put the pistol to their head, ending their pain and suffering with a gunshot, before the circle of the ritual would swallow their corpse. However, after the demise of several hunters, the man with the cane brought back an individual that immediately caught Kevin's attention. A hunter that stood out among the rest. A woman by the name of Mary. She carried herself with inhuman confidence, and her eyes seemed to glow with darkness. Her face and body was covered in scars, telling the tale of an individual who seemed to have stared down death more times than one could imagine. And while Mary's voice carried authority, even subtle ire, it was obvious that she was stricken with grief.
I'm surprised you decided to go along with this, Miss Oakenshove. What made you change your mind?
The expeditions are just not cutting it anymore.
You certainly know your way around the bayous. The organization has benefited greatly from your endeavors over the last couple of months, but may I ask, why do you continue to pursue the eradication of these dangerous creatures? You addicted to the thrill?
My husband, he is bedstricken with a horrible sickness. Scarlet fever. My job in the saloon just wasn't enough anymore, with both the treatment and medicine cutting into our expenses.
I see. Love is such a powerful emotion. But rest assured, Miss Oakenshove, both I and the association have access to several doctors well versed in the effects of scarlet fever. If tonight is a success, I will see to it that you are compensated well in terms of money, as well as proper treatment for your husband.
Kevin watched as Mary stepped into the circle of the ritual, knowing full well what was about to happen. However, as the moonlight hit the surface of the circle, and the symbols lit up in white, the gun didn't turn white hot. Instead, Kevin's eyes opened wide, as Mary's entire body was engulfed in flames, enveloped in a roaring fire that towered far above her, lighting up the dark swamps around them. But to Kevin's surprise, even though the ferocious flames covered every inch of Mary's body, she did not scream, she didn't whimper, and when the fire subsided, she stood in the circle, unburned and untouched. Kevin was aghast. As she stood there in front of him, her outward appearance seemed fine, but something about Mary had changed. Her posture had weakened. The glow in her eyes was gone and now replaced by something Kevin could only describe as unmitigated melancholy. Without a word spoken between the two, Mary parted ways with Mr. Chary, and Kevin were left wondering what he had just witnessed, but it would take until the next night before he finally got his answer. In the faint light of the moon hidden behind its cloudy cover, Mr. Chary appeared at the cottage once again. As always, one at a time, he had brought out two seasoned hunters, just like Mary. The two hunters were both tough and grizzled, radiating with some sort of inconceivable force of what Kevin felt to be occult energy. Both of them performed the ritual, and just like Mary, both of them were set ablaze in the middle of the circle, coming out untouched and unscathed by the tower of flames. But just like Mary, the ritual changed them. The fire in their eyes had faded, the emanating power from their personas stripped, and what remained was empty shells, soulless and catatonic. Mr. Chary would escort each of them away from the cottage and tell them both the same thing, almost unable to contain his excitement.
Bring me back the thing you cherish most.
Mr. Chary would then bring back a third hunter to the cottage, but as with most of the others, the gun would turn white hot, the hunter's hands would melt off, and the hunter would kill himself before vanishing into the ground. Mr. Chary's gaze remained on the circle, indifferent and unimpressed by the death of the hunter, before he suddenly reacted to the sound of sobbing behind him, and he turned around with a subtle smile of anticipation.
Welcome back, Miss Okenchov. Did you bring the thing you cherish most?
Mary responded with a nod, sobbing as she looked at the ground, her spirit crushed and defeated.
Then if you would, proceed with the ritual. Please.
Mary stepped forward, holding a sewed cloth of rag in her hands. The proud and determined hunter Kevin had seen the day before was gone, seeming like an empty husk of regret and shame. Kevin felt hesitation in her mannerism, as if she was fighting against herself, almost like she wasn't in control of her own body. Mary's hands reluctantly reached into the rag, and Kevin's blood froze to ice as she pulled out a heart, extending it towards Mr. Chary, who gladly accepted it.
How ironic.
Mr. Chary's face wore a devious smile, and Mary's soul-crushing cries of anguish rang out for the night. Kevin felt sick. The cries of Mary burdened him with a grief he had never felt before, not even at the loss of his parents. With the smile still plastered on his face, Mr. Chary nonchalantly tossed the heart into the circle of the ritual, and it would seem that the sacrifice Mary had made was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The heart sank into the ground and the circle immediately reacted. The flames of the candles lit up in a bright blaze, towering far above Mr. Chary, while the symbols around the circle were disrupted, and as the ground opened up, spheres made of branches and roots from box elders and chokeberry trees rolled out of the hole, dancing around Mr. Chary with a smoking glow in the moonlight. Then came the skulls, dozens of them, whirling around Mr. Chary like an undead tornado before they assembled themselves in a monumental tower covered in cloth. The totem drifted off into the night, and the spheres all followed behind it, except for a single one. The sphere continued rolling around the feet of Mr. Chary, who picked it up and admired it in the moonlight. The smoke around the sphere seemed to welcome Mr. Chary, almost as if it was trying to entice him to become one with it, or at least part of it. Without hesitation, Mr. Chary crushed the sphere in his palm, and a faint scream rang out as the ball turned from glowing light to a dusty cloud of nothing. And while Mr. Chary smiled to himself, Kevin could swear that the scream he had just heard had been the voice of Hess. Hey there, Hazmat here. This was only part 2 in the story about Mr. Chary and the Traitor's Moon, so stay tuned for more. As always, a big thanks goes out to the Hunters Lounge on Patreon, who helps me decide on future content and which you can join for a single $1 a month. Link is in the description below. A big thanks as well to Landen Brown, Elli Reeds, and Jack Olson for their outstanding performances in this video. Direct links to their social media profiles are listed in the description. And of course, a big thanks to both Tip and Rexley from the Hunt Showdown Discord, who I would be absolutely lost without. And as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.